Welcome to mypersonalfootballcoach.com's Soccer Player Development Podcast. Discover all the secrets, hints and tips about soccer player development and soccer coaching from some of the leading figures in world soccer. Here's your host, Saul Isaacson Hurst.
Exciting guys, Saul here. Welcome back to another show. Before we get into the show, I want to say a big welcome to, first of all, Mountaineer United Soccer Club out in America, also Fairmont University, another college program out in America, and also the United Arab Emirates Pro League, their academies also, that's out in the UAE. All utilising the My Personal Football Coach Club partnership. And look, that just goes to show you the diversity of clubs and federations and organisations utilising the My Personal Football Coach Club partnership. We've got clubs like Arsenal, Wolves and Middlesbrough, some of the best academies in the country, utilising as well as grassroots clubs all around the world, federations and college programmes. So listen, if you're interested in taking your club, your college, or your federation to the next level, just drop me a DM. I can set you up a free demo and we can see how we can help you out with the My Personal Football Coach Club partnership. But now onto the show, and this week we've got a top guest. It's Alex Nichols. Alex is a technical coach at Arsenal's academy. Obviously, Arsenal, one of the best academies in world football. And Alex is a top guy, really intelligent guy, speaks really well about the game, very experienced. He worked at Brentford, then Watford, and then several years now at Arsenal, all the way across the age groups. And like I say, as a technical coach like myself, a specialist, talk about some of that work that goes on at that top academy. And he's also an individual coach and specialist as well. He's got a business similar to myself. To talk a little bit about that, but this is another one not to be missed, another top practitioner. I'm really appreciate they came on the show, and without further ado, let's get into the show. So Alex Nichols, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Can you give us a brief outline of your playing and coaching journey up to this point, please?
Played up until the age of 18, started at Brentford at the age of 20. After Brentford, went on to Watford, to the under-15s, and have been at Arsenal for the last 6 seasons.
So you started, so say again to the beginning, that was the quickest one ever, by the way. That's pretty mean feat. Well done. Just almost sort of missed it. So you stopped playing at 16.
Stopped playing at 18, got into coaching from 19.
Right. So your first coaching job was at Brentford, yeah? Yeah.
First coaching job was at Brentford, then Watford. I was at Watford for a year and a half. After Brentford for 4 years, and then Arsenal for 6 years, last 6 seasons.
Wow, fantastic. So give us a little, then let's just wind back then. Talk about that first coaching role, going in as a 20-year-old. How did that come about, and what was that like? And listen, we've talked about Brentford on the last show many times. Danny Buck's been on the show, for me, one of the best coaches I've ever seen. Unbelievable environment there. Tell us a little bit about that.
So, starting off at Brentford, starting off in the development centres, and obviously being a relatively young coach, was at uni, doing a sports degree, and just always kind of wanting to be in like that kind of elite environment. And had a contact of mine, someone who actually coached me, who was working at the academy at the time, and he said, "Look, there's an opportunity to come and to begin with in a development centre, just shadowing, observing, literally just that, and just kind of find your feet and kind of see if it's right for you, but more importantly, see if you're right for the club." And that's where it started, really. Was at the development centre for about a good 6 months on an unpaid basis. Was quickly kind of evolved from observing, shadowing, to kind of helping just with balls and kind of doing registers. Then it progressed to kind of, okay, go on, can you do 20 minutes of a session at the development centre? Kind of proved myself there, and then relatively quickly got moved into the academy.
So tell us about that, those first experiences at development centres. I mean, what was the type of sessions going on? What the coach delivering? What was your initial things you picked up as a young, fresh coach there? So
the hardest thing for me was dealing with the intensity and the speed of the sessions. I really struggled with the first of all, getting to know all the children on such a personal basis, because there were so many children at the development centre, and trying to build relationships with them, but whilst also observing and analysing them, but at the same time, also trying to deliver a high quality session. And I was at a stage of my development as a coach where so much of my emphasis and concentration would be on sessions. Sessions would be would be ball mastery to begin with, first 10, 15 minutes, followed by 1v1/2v2s. And then it'll be a slight kind of possession type based game. And then it would finish often with matches towards the end. Relatively simple structure, but effective in what it was in terms of number of ball touches that the players were having, but also the amount of bodies that were there at Brentford. We used to have so many eyes on players. And my focus, like I say, for the first 6 months was very much on just trying to be able to concentrate on just delivering a session that was to the standard. So I found it really hard to juggle delivering a session to the standard whilst also analysing players. And there'd be times, I remember in the first 3 months of me being at Brentford, I'd come in and I had been so focused on my session, I'd come in and then Miguel Rios would ask me, "Oh, what did you think about this player?" And literally, I couldn't even remember the player. I really struggled with finding that balance. And I think that was probably testament to how inexperienced I was at the time at 20, to be able to deliver a session at the standard that was demanded. And by the way, the standard was a very high standard. But also be able to analyse players in the detail that other coaches were able to. So it's a real fast learning curve, you know.
Interesting. Testing about you moving to progressing to the academy. What was that like? Because the relationship between the development centre and the academy was so closely linked, so many of the coaches and the recruitment staff that I was with at the development centre at Northolt was also at the academy at Jersey Road. So the transition was relatively seamless, but obviously the quality of the players was far higher. So that took some adapting to. And then also the next challenge was for me, well, now I'm able to deliver effective sessions that's kind of demanded by kind of the club. And I'm also able to analyse players. Actually, can I now start to develop myself as a coach to adapt sessions specifically for the needs of individuals, but also to stretch and challenge your outstanding individuals to ensure that there's a high level of differentiation, and all individual players' needs were met. And what were the roles you did in the academy then?
So started in and around the under 9s and 10s. That was 2011 going to 2012. So it was 9s and 10s to begin with. But the great thing about Brentford was, which really helped me as a coach, was that we'd always work across age groups. So I would predominantly be with 9s and 10s. That would be at least 2 out of the 3 sessions plus a game each week. But then I also might do a under 8 session still with the main group. So you was always kind of kept on your toes with the amount of players that you were seeing, but also you gained a greater understanding and insight as to what the pathway was going to look like, because you was always seeing at least 3 age groups per week, which strengthened me as a coach, but also probably helped the players the most because they had got to see so many different coaches, but who still had a good quality relationship with them. It wasn't just randoms, it was always a consistent basis, but it wasn't just 2 coaches that the player would see, it would probably be about 3 or 4.
What are the main things you took from those early stages of your career in terms of, you talked about obviously your session design and making sure then you take it individually. What else were the major takeaways from those first experiences? Everything
at Brentford was very much principle orientated, whether that was kind of club philosophy in terms of we used to have kind of morals and values that we used to always stick to, things like excuses equal failure, and so on. So those kind of principles really, really helped me in my understanding, simply because there was always a strong and structured framework. The expectations in terms of developing the players was very much a close relationship with recruitment. So recruitment and coaches had a very close relationship because ultimately we were a small club in League One at the time, trying to compete with big Cat 1 clubs and obviously Chelsea around the corner and like to QPR at the time. When I first started, we was playing catch up to QPR, but that kind of quickly changed as the years went on. Biggest thing I probably learned was learning to manage different types of players, but also managing different types of parents as well. Building relationships with different types of parents, different types of background, but equally having a high quality relationship with them, depending on what those individuals' needs were. The environment was extremely intense in terms of expectations on coaches, intense in terms of expectations placed on players, and everybody in the building, if I'm being brutally honest. And I've always maintained that those first 4 years I spent at Brentford were largely, I I could have been at another club for 10 years. I wouldn't have learned that much as much as what I did in the 4 years. And then towards the end, the last 2 seasons was spent doing, I was moved from 9s and 10s to the under 11s, under 12s.
Interesting. Tell us a bit about that, those expectations. Give us an example then. So what were they, firstly for the coaches, give us a bit of, some of the detail there.
So first of all, the standards off the pitch were absolutely kind of essential. The way that we conducted ourselves, to the way that we wore the kit, to when we was in the kit, even when we was off site, kind of what types of expectations were in terms of our behaviour, that we carried ourselves, demanding kind of high level professionalism. And then when we walked on the building, just basic standards in terms of how we interacted with players, whether they were older players that we didn't coach, whether they were younger players that we didn't coach. And creating a real community type of atmosphere whereby people felt that they were part of something bigger. In terms of demands of coaches on the grass, you could probably argue that they were just as intense. The demand for the players to constantly be learning, the demands for the framework. A lot of it was much more around the framework of the sessions, ensuring that certain standards were met in terms of ensuring they'd done a sufficient amount of 1v1 and 2v2 type work. Ensuring they've done enough ball mastery, ensuring that certain principles and our golden thread for whatever the monthly topic was delivered, but delivered in a constructive, but with also a plan in place for across the course of those 4 weeks. We used to work on a month-to-month basis with different topics. And
so what would that? So give us an idea then, like month to month, what would those topics be?
So, for example, goodness me, a topic may be playing through the thirds. That was a topic that we used to have. One of my favourite topics that we used to have at Brentford was almost like a player ownership type of month, where what would happen is the first 45 minutes of the session would be heavily coached. So, for example, if I was taking an under 12s group, I may have half the group, and the other coach may have the other half of the group, and my topic may be breaking a deep block there, and the other coach may coach defending in a deep block to counter. So the topics linked well together. And then what would happen is it would be heavily coached for 45 minutes. I would coach my players specifically what we were looking for. And it was like lots of command-based type coaching to ensure they understood what was expected in certain scenarios. And then the next part of the session, the next 45 to an hour, was literally the players playing against each other in a game. And the coaches weren't allowed to speak. Coaches didn't speak, coaches didn't coach. And it was just that it was probably the month where I probably learned the most about the players. Because they were thrown into an environment where, because we at Brentford we were on the players and we really demanded high standards, we got to find out how much the players were actually able to apply themselves, integrate within a team, but also communicate. So that was probably one of my favourite months that we had.
Interesting. And you mentioned there that you had to have ball mastery and 1v1 straight 2v2 in every session. I mean, look, we take it for granted because we've worked in those environments. Tell us why those things are so important for player development.
Oh, well, they're essential. And at the time, if I'm being brutally honest, at 20 and 21, I thought it was just the given thing, the standard thing that players would engage in some form of 1v1, 2v2 or ball mastery in every session at every academy. And then on top of that, we would also at Brentford have two sessions on grass or in the Astro on a dome. Then we'd also have one session of futsal. So it was highly technical, but I wasn't aware of it at the time. And it's so important, especially at every age group is important. And I think there's an issue where people think that technical development is only essential in the foundation phase. And that's where it starts. That's where you build your foundation without a doubt. However, it has to progress and players have to be able to see how that then fits into their position-specific role when they get to 13 and 14. But what it did at Brentford, it gave them a footing. What it did at Brentford, it ensured that our players were able to move with the football, master the football. And most importantly, our attack-minded players were able to dominate 1v1s in wide areas and central areas, but also across the board, all of our players were always able to master the ball to a minimum level, even at 9 and 10, where they could get out of tight areas, recycle the ball if needed, but also had a trick. And the big thing was at Brentford, as much as we gave them variety and built their technical toolbox, we were big on the understanding that these players will usually have one or two tricks, which will be their go-tos. And you see that with the top pros. But our job early on was to ensure that they had that go-to trick in order for us to build possession, retain the ball, and also be able to eventually progress possession forwards.
Interesting. And then just tell us then, I mean, people often just like Brent, it almost goes under the radar in terms of that environment, because in terms of, because obviously Ozzy Espenji was at Spurs and I was there, and Danny Buck, again, like we say, one of the best I've ever seen. And in terms of recruitment, Sean O'Connor and Miguel Rios, two of the best in the game. And then you're like people like Andy Hayes and John D'Souza and that Charlton come through there, yourself, and unbelievable amount of like coaching and recruitment talent. And obviously, as we see, which produced so much playing talent. I mean, obviously, firstly, such a shame they closed it down. But I mean, tell us about that uniqueness, that environment, being able to go in and, you know, as a young coach and learn off some of the best in the world like that. Some of the best around must have been fantastic.
So academy football 11 years ago was just so different as well. So what would happen is I'd go in and I knew the environment was challenging for me. I knew I was out my comfort zone, especially for the first year and a half, where I was really learning day by day, not even week by week. And as much as I respected people like Bucky and Ozzy, I thought they were great in terms of their knowledge and I was learning so much, I didn't realise, and I took it for granted, where they sat as individuals within the wider field of coaching, not just in England, but also Europe and further afield. So I took it for granted that I was working with people like Miguel. And Miguel was really kind of instrumental in terms of the early interaction, because he managed the development centre. He was kind of somebody who I had interaction with from almost day one. So I had a great insight as to the links and the correlation between coaching and recruitment. And almost we never really tried to find a line where coaching stopped and recruitment began. They often merged, and it merged in a seamless kind of harmony where recruitment staff were in tandem with coaches, and we almost saw coaching as an extension of recruitment, especially in the pre-academy age groups, which it always is. In terms of the environment that Oz set was outstanding. I remember distinctly going into the office, and this must have been my second or third year. And I remember Oz said, "What you think it's better at this club or that club or a big club or a top Prem club?" And he was like, "No, this is outstanding here." And with the way Oz was, I kind of half believed things. I knew how good we were, and we would turn up and outplay teams who were far kind of larger clubs than us, shall we say. And I knew we were onto a really, really good thing, and I knew the coaches were of a high standard. But then the other half of me, you always think, oh, well, you know, when you get to a top Prem club or a European club, like Real Madrid type, you think it's going to be different. And invariably, over the years, you realise kind of the quality of the people and the amount of experience they had at the time, but also where they've then gone on to progress their career. Obviously, Bucky, I've worked with closely at Arsenal in the last 6 years, 2 or 3 years with him doing the 8s, and in the last season doing the 16s with him at Arsenal.
Decent. So then tell us about then your next move, Brentford. How did that come about, moving from Brentford to Watford?
So I'd got to the end of the 4 years at Brentford, and I was looking for a new challenge, something that was gonna stretch me, something that I thought my career needed. The oldest age group I'd done at that point, 4 years in, was under 12s really. And as good as they were, and they were an excellent group, and so many have gone on to achieve so many things, I wanted to work with older players as well, to stretch myself as a coach again, but also kind of see a new philosophy. And the opportunity came up at Watford. I had a couple of friends who already worked there, and they kind of recommended me to go for the role and interview for the role. And I was given the option to either choose 15s or 16s. Now, 15s and 16s, it was a big step up for me, because I'd gone to Watford at the time, we're a Prem club. And I had a very close friend in Carl Martin, who I'd known for 5-6 years at that time. So I chose to work with Carl during the 15s at Watford, and it was a totally different environment. And what it did is, it didn't stretch me like Brentford did. Watford, it definitely didn't stretch me. But what it did do, and because the environment was so laissez-faire, shall we say, it allowed me to experiment. So I was able to experiment with sessions which maybe I might not have taken so many risks with at Brentford, and I took risks with sessions. Sometimes got it wrong, sometimes made errors, sometimes we changed the session halfway through, and so it not only was I doing a different age group, and also kind of with a good games program, because they just changed from Cat 3 to going towards Cat 2. I was also working with much older players. So I was learning again day by day, and it felt like Brentford, but except for rather than the environment driving the standards, I was driving my standards, because I still had all those Brentford principles, which I was kind of embedded with from the very start.
Interesting. Tell us, then, I always ask this question, because I've been lucky enough to work at a few clubs now. What were the major, compare and contrast your experiences? Brentford, relatively small club, Watford, quite a big club, like I said, Premier League club at the time, massive history in the game, long, very successful academy. What are the main sort of differences you noticed in the academies?
To be honest, so it was chalk and cheese. There was no intensity in the environment. There was far less kind of standards that were expected, and obviously this is Watford I'm talking about 7-8 years ago now, so it's very different to the setup that they have now. But in terms of, there wasn't as much directive from senior management, which gave coaches a lot of freedom. What it did allow me to do was, like I say, experiment. The biggest factor that was probably the difference was the approach to how the coaches viewed the club. So when it comes to recruitment, and even though I was doing a much older age group, I would always kind of have conversations with everybody across the board, and especially at the pre-academy age groups, and I would hear lots of phrases like, "Oh well, it is Man City, it is Man United, it is," they were seen as a club that was of a higher level, of a better level. Now, okay, when you talk about first team, okay, maybe they were better, but the approach at Brentford was a total opposite. It had that slight tinge of arrogance, which I think is necessary at any academy, because we genuinely felt, and the more experienced coaches knew, that the environment that we had set was something that was comparable to any club in the country. It genuinely was. Whereas the mindset of Watford was very much, well, it is Arsenal or it is Chelsea, and then we saw ourselves as below that. And it was almost an acceptance with regards to recruitment at times, that when players signed at Arsenal, where I was like, well, what can we do? Can we put something in place? And that was the mindset of Brentford. When somebody said they were going to sign somewhere differently, we never saw ourselves as, well, it is a bigger club. We saw ourselves, no, this is the best place to do a development. And at Brentford, we had players that were offered at top Cat 1 clubs. And as we had players that were offered at top Cat 1 clubs, they would sometimes choose Brentford, because they genuinely felt that environment cared the most for their children and set a precedent which was they felt had more longevity for their child's development. And that was the kind of mindset that I tried to that I approached Watford with, and that was probably the biggest difference. Not so much in terms of the coaches, because they had very, very good coaches at several age groups. It was more about kind of the approach to recruitment, and also the number of recruitment staff. I was used to being at Brentford, and you go to a 15-16 session at Brentford, and there'd be 5 or 6 scouts just around watching, making sure that what they were going to go and scout off the grass. We went into the business of buying players, ensuring that was what they were bringing in off the grass would have been comparable to what's already in the building. And when I got to Watford at 15-16, there was far less emphasis on the scouting aspect. I worked with Danny Dolan, and Danny Dolan was very good in terms of learning what was required and what the aims were. But he kind of was trying to build that kind of network, whereas at Brentford we already had it in place, and I think that was probably the biggest difference.
And tell us about your just in session 1 design and delivery. What did that look like? What sort of sessions were we putting on for the 15s there?
So there was always far more phases of play. Naturally, we had far larger areas to use. We were able to kind of experiment with sessions. And what the biggest difference at Watford was that the topics would change from week to week as opposed to month to month. And by having that kind of setup week to week, it kept it fresh for the players. But it was also a challenge, because within the space of a week, there's only a certain amount of learning that any player can do. So, for example, and also the topics were far more specific. So it might be creating overloads in wide offensive areas. that might be a topic for the week. So it would require me as a coach to set up either a function or a phase of play which was able to develop and stretch and challenge players, and slowly build it up. But in such a small period of time as a week, it really stretched and challenged me as a coach, because every little bit of detail kind of had to relate to the day or the session before, whilst also ensuring that we were on a quick journey towards kind of the end of the week or the final session, so that the players were able to consolidate their knowledge, but also add extra kind of or further knowledge for the players to empower and enrich their learning, which was a challenge. Outside of the phases of plays and the functions, it was largely similar. Approach to Paul Marshy was very good. Carl, really forward-thinking coach, worked with Louis Lancaster as well during the 16s. Often the 15s and 16s would train together. Louis was very good as well, really kind of thought outside the box, as is Carl. Both gone on to do good things in football. So it would be lots of ball mastery. It would be plenty of small possession type practices, and then it would build into a phase and then a game at the end of the session.
What about what are the practical differences or challenges from working with the foundation phase into working with the YDP at the top of the YDP now?
Yeah, so I think that was probably one of the hardest jumps to make. So what the players are experiencing at those ages of 15 and 16 is largely around what happens away from off the grass, in terms of the pressures of school, the pressures of the GCSEs. At Watford and every other club at the time, we had players. Half the players were at the school, and we did the school program at the time, but then also the other half were being transported in on buses, and some of them would come from as far as Essex. So their whole week or their whole day was sometimes starting at 6 a.m. and then wasn't finishing to 11 p.m. They were doing longer days than some of the staff. So taking that into consideration when coaching them, and having a high level of understanding to support, number one, but number two, to also ensure that the players were still engaged, but also enjoying their time at the club. Because even though at 15 and 16, as much as it starts to become more serious and you're heading towards scholar age groups, the players still have to love it as much as what they do in the foundation phase. So
tell us about your next move then. You move across London to arguably the greatest club in the world. No, I'm joking. to Arsenal, as a Arsenal fan, I'm joking. So just tell us about how that move come on to you moving across to the red side of North London.
So when I was at Brentford, we had a scout. There was a scout who was also doing some coaching for us, called Joe Sutton, and Joe was working at the time on an ad hoc basis at Brentford, and it later went on to become a more consistent role. And Joe initially would start to bring some teams in to play against us at Brentford, and I would coach against him with our academy players, and he'd bring in, if I had an under-12s group at Brentford, he'd bring in an under-13s group from outside, and we'd have a game, and also we'd chat. And then what had transpired is that Joe had then since left Brentford, as had I, and he had then got the job as basically head of the pre-academy at Arsenal, from 6s all the way up to 8s. So me and him had some conversations, and he was like, look, we're looking for some new staff. Would you like to come in and kind of interview for it? So I did the interview, went really well. And then kind of that was how I made the move. And at the same time I started there, I was then working with Bucky again, who had since left Brentford after it closed down.
What was your thought process going in there in terms of, obviously, you're working 15 to 16s, were you a bit apprehensive, saying going back to work with the younger stage groups? Or tell us about that.
To be honest, I thought the 18 months that I spent at Watford kind of empowered me in terms of the quality of experience that I'd had with experimenting with sessions, taking some risks, and so on and so forth. But I always wanted to work at one of the biggest clubs, and it was a perfect opportunity for me. And age group for me was never an issue. Yes, I'd always wanted to work with older players. However, the bottom line is that I was very aware. Working with top players was always my priority. Being able to get the best out of the very, very best players was always my aim and ambition. And then within that, then working with older players. So I had no issues going back to do under 8s again. And listen, we were working with some of the best under 8s in the country at the time, and we still are recruiting them at Arsenal. And when I first went in, sometimes the level of information that you can give those players was akin to under 10, under 11 anyway, just because they're so technically advanced, but also so psychologically advanced in terms of their intelligence and game insight. So I had no issues with that. The biggest challenge again was kind of the language. The principles of what you're trying to get out don't change. It's the language that you have to use to engage the players. And also, again, it's about building relationships. And you just have to be very mindful of the fact that the players that are coming in at under 8, they're new to the system. And I'm going to do under 8s again now at the start of 2016, having left Watford. And this is these parents' first time in, and I'm looking at myself now as a far more experienced coach, somebody who's seen far more of the game, and I was in a far better position to build relationships with parents, but also give them wider information about how the system works, but also the fantastic things that the club could do for them.
And so tell us a little bit about then, compare and contrast again, like this Brentford, no disrespect to Watford. Watford's a big club, but you're Arsenal, one of the biggest clubs in the world and one of the best academies in the world. What was that? What was the immediate things you noticed, and particularly as a coach?
Biggest thing was facilities. That's kind of the moment you walk in. Quality facilities, and obviously the facilities kind of developed since I got there. But then players, the quality of the players, and the demands and expectations that you're holding your standards to is more significant. The bottom line is that you're trying to develop Champions League players, and whether that's you working with an under 16 player, whether that's you working with an under 8 player, you're trying to develop players to be the very, very best, and you're competing with the globe. You genuinely are. You're working at a club which has the capability of buying players at any stage in throughout the academy player's career, whether that be at 16, at 18, and so on. So you're constantly measuring yourself not against the yardstick within the club, but you're measuring it immediately within the yardstick domestically. Well, am I actually developing this player to be better than the player at another top Cat 1 club, and so on and so forth. So the demands and the targeted approach is of a far higher standard. As I said before, it's about developing Champions League players, which puts a lot of pressure on coaches. But it's a I was always just say it's a privilege to coach under pressure, and it was something which I didn't understand at first, but it is so true.
Absolutely, I can definitely agree with that one. So tell us a bit about the curriculum and stuff like that, the methodology. I mean, how did that work? And was it a technical cycle, tactical cycle?
Yeah, so in terms of the structure of the sessions, it was very much high detail. And the level of detail, as I said, was obviously a lot higher than what you could give at some other clubs. Also the quality of the players that you had in the door, but then also heavy emphasis on ball mastery. And what I loved so much about it was because I came in with Bucky, and I also had a relationship with Joe and Kieran Lewis. We worked so closely together in terms of putting all of our experiences and expertise together. So being able to have a significant kind of influence on what the pre-academy structure was, not just at the 8th group that I was doing, but also at the 7s and how that fed in. It allowed kind of real kind of creative license, and us to bounce so many ideas off each other. And again, I was then liaising with Bucky, and listen, as an experienced coach now, as opposed to somebody who was fresh in the door. So I was able to add plenty in terms of the ball mastery approach, and then we were 1v1 and 2v2 kind of heavy in terms of the structure of the sessions. But then also there was also always an element where players would have to develop their game insight. So the first half an hour would always be ball mastery, arrival activity first of all, because many of them arrive early. You're trying to create an environment where the players love to be there. So if the player turns up 15 minutes before and there's no coach on the grass, that's a disaster. They've got, the moment they walk in, there's got to be someone there to engage them, someone there to greet them, greet parents, but also they've got to be active. So trying to create an environment, even at under 8, because you're preparing them for the academy, that they feel when they turn up early, they get rewards. They get an extra few touches of the ball, in terms of sometimes hundreds of touches of the ball, and they learn something new. They learn something outside the box, and so you create an environment where players want to get to training early. And you see over the course of months where that then becomes really it becomes almost infectious within the players. The players are desperate to get on the grass. And then after the arrival activity, it would be like at least half an hour to 40 minutes of 2v2 type practices, 1v1 type practices, ball mastery. And then we'd often split and have a carousel type structure, whereby one station would be game understanding, game insight. One element might be around specific technical practice, like reverse passes or so on and so forth. And then another station may be around passing and receiving, and just refining kind of our brilliant basics in terms of how players pass, receive, and understand, and how that links to kind of the game insight type practice that would also
give us an idea. Give us an idea what that game insight practice might look like.
So the game insight practice might be as simple as an actual game. So it will be structured as a game, and you might even split the pitch into thirds, for example. And you may have a depending on what the topic is. If you're doing an attacking topic, it may be that, and you're trying to encourage players to create overloads. You might have, if you cone the pitch off into thirds, like horizontally, it may be a case of if you play into the next third, you have to go in during the next third. So if you play in, join in. So you're getting a basic principle of play in, join in, and that's all the players need to understand at that stage is play in, join in. But when you're saying things like that, what it does, it starts to build habits. And then when you kind of get the players back in, it's then what is play in, join in? What does that create? Oh, it creates overloads. Okay, so then what might the overloads look like? Overloads might look like an overlap. Overloads might look like an underlap. Overloads might look like supporting behind because the player on the ball can't play forward. However, you're still in a 2v1 situation. So you're essentially structuring your game with a constraint, which then allows and encourages and is a tool to drive the learning of a specific principle that you're working on that week. As I said, the example just there with attacking, creating overloads, play in, join in, that's the rule of the game, but then you start to build habits within players.
And so what was your next role then at Arsenal? Where did you move out the eight?
So I did two, after the first season, I then went on to do, there was a job came up to do the under 9s and 10s. I applied for the role, but I ended up actually working with the 12s. So I then combined my role with, by doing under 8 in the second season, under 8 and under 12s. At that time, even as a part-timer, I was doing 7 days a week. So it worked perfectly. So I would do the under 12s 4 times a week and the pre-academy 3 times a week, which was great. So I would do 8s and 12s simultaneously, which was a great experience. Worked with Adam Birchall, and that was my first season working with Birch. And it was just a thoroughly enjoyable experience. 12s are something that I'd already done previously. And it was a good 12s group that we had, a very, very good 12s group at Brentford. So lots of my experiences that I'd already had really helped me, and kind of I'd often bounce ideas off of Birch in terms of the structure of the sessions, but also kind of the level of detail to which the technical development was appropriate.
Give us an idea then what it looks like, because you talk about the 8s, which was the beginning of the foundation. Tell us what the 12s looks at the end of the foundation, what the sessions look like, what was the approach?
Yeah, so the approach going in the 12s was very much topic orientated, and as we would build the topic up within the 12s, it was a case of we had, because you're working at, obviously, like you say, one of the world's biggest clubs and one of the world's best clubs, you have a lot of high-level thinkers. And the challenge was to create sessions on a session basis, which were, first of all, challenging for your best players, for your outstanding players, but then also were able to have a high level of differentiation for the players who may needed something specific within their development with regard to the topic. So it was a higher level of planning that was required. And then the sessions would often be, again, plenty of ball mastery, arrival activities, and then it would split the group in half, and then it would be 1v1s, 2v2 type practices, and then the other coach may do a pass and receiving practice, then it'll be a swap, and then we go into some kind of game understanding or game insight type practice, similar to what I explained with the 8s, slightly larger areas, much higher detail, and then we'd often finish with games.
See, I mean, look, I'm not playing devil's advocate, cool, but like what you're telling me is that as we experience, as most academies will say, you're getting good variation of unopposed work and opposed work, individual stuff on the ball and technical stuff and game orientated stuff. I mean, that's reality, isn't it? And then although you get these people who talk about everything done in a game situation. Tell us why do you think it's so important that you get players get experience of both, away from the game, the unopposed stuff and the opposed stuff?
Yeah, I mean the unopposed element was massive. In the 12 season, we used to do it used to feature in every session. Same with the under 8s, to be fair. And the main reason why it's so important is the value of repetition. So within each movement pattern, you're coaching players essentially to be able to move in a consistent but the most efficient way possible. Now, in order to develop that, the game is too random in order to get the specific outcomes that you can get, that you need to play at the top level. So there needs to be a high level of repetition, and it has to be balanced between unopposed, semi-opposed, and fully opposed. Because players then, once they've got an understanding of the movement pattern, they've then got to try and apply it. And then you're adding in extra elements, and a lot of this comes within, it fits within the kind of the realms of coordination. At first, you're trying to build players coordination with the football. You're trying to ensure they're actually able to move efficiently with the football, not effectively, but efficiently to begin with. And then as you're adding in arm movements, you're then trying to encourage them to make an element of decision. So as you're starting to build it into a semi-opposed practice, you're asking them to use a decision in terms of which direction to go, etc., but at the same time, trying to use the principles that you've already embedded within your unopposed practice. And then obviously when it gets to fully opposed, players, you're then looking for a degree of autonomy. You're looking for a degree of autonomy from players, because only the game is so fast that players will react off of habit. So the unopposed and the semi-opposed stuff builds habits. And then once they're efficient within that, you'll start to see it more consistently in the opposed areas.
Interesting. So then tell us then about you move up to the YDP. Tell us about that, how long you've been there and what sort of stuff you're doing.
Yeah, so I mean, after I did the 12s, I then became the head coach for the 9s, which was great because I was working with the same group that I'd worked with previously. That was a fantastic experience. We won the futsal nationals in the under 9 season. Worked with Josh Hinks, and that was a fantastic experience. Working with Josh again, who I'd worked with previously at Brentford. Following that, then went on to the under 14. So that was again another jump. But I'd made it before, so it wasn't something that fazed me. I was actually really excited to be working with older players, and ironically, I ended up working with the same group that I had at 12 at 14, which again was fantastic because I'd already had relationships with parents, relationships with players, and it just allowed me to kind of hit the ground running because I already had that kind of existing kind of relationship base, and so I was able to affect the players more instantly, or at least that's the way that I saw it. So the step up to 14 was different. And you're entering more cup competitions, Albert Feeling Cup, and so on and so forth, which is a great variation in the games program. Which obviously we have no leagues under 14. So yeah, it was a great experience working with the 14s.
And so, how long did you do with the 14s? And because you worked with the 15s and now with the 16s, so let's do it chronologically. How long you've been with each group? Yeah,
so I actually stayed with the same group. So I had them at 12, and I was the head coach for the 9s. Then I had the same group at 14. Then I moved up with them again at 15. Then I moved up with them again at 16. So I've had a very unique experience in having the same group at obviously such a top club for 4 years out of their last 5. So I had them at 12, 14, 15, and 16. That is something which I really, really value highly. I value it highly not just because of working with top players, but I think it aided and added a significant amount to my development. Having that level of consistency really kind of allowed me to see the full youth development phase from what we would argue as early youth development phase all the way through to the latest stage of youth development phase, and being able to see how players develop, but also the level of patience that's also required when you're developing players at that age and stage, largely due to growth, largely due to outside influences, and what they may be experiencing with exam pressure, etc., etc.
So like Arsenal obviously talks about one of the best academies in the world, obviously always at the forefront of evolving the game and what they do as well. And they're quite unique, and I really like this in terms of they have, with the age group, a head coach, they have a technical specialist and a game insight specialist. You're obviously the technical specialist. So tell us about your role there with the 16s. How does that work? And tell us about your day-to-day or your weekly, what are your duties, if you like, and in terms of that role?
So being a technical specialist just allows, I think that, first of all, I think the structure is great. I think it's a really, really good structure. I think it caters for everything that the players need, but then also it compartmentalizes it to ensure that kind of every base is covered. The biggest blessing that I've had this year was actually who I've worked with. So I'd worked with Birch at 12, at 14, and again at 16. Obviously, I've had the players. This was my fourth year having the players, and I'd worked with Bucky several years prior at Brentford, and then in the 8. So we were, to me, the quality of the relationship with the coaches was even better. It added even more value. My day to day would be, we'd have a day whereby our unopposed work, would kind of form the basis of the technical development, and there'll be a session that I would deliver around that. But then much more of the technical execution was or is on a semi-opposed basis, but then also linked to position-specific stuff. So you might split defenders, attackers, midfielders, but then also executing techniques which they will rely on and require to be as refined as possible within their game program now, but then also with half an eye on what it's going to look like when they go to Colney and further.
And so, tell us also about, because I want to know what's your, in terms of game day, tell us about your duties on game day and how's that work?
Yeah. So on game day, the big kind of element for me as a technical specialist is to highlight and observe kind of moments where technical execution is kind of outstanding and things where we see players execute some things that we work on within training, but then also look for areas where I can still further develop the players from a technical execution perspective, whether that be a receiving technique, whether that be using an open body, whether that be a 1v1 technique that a player may have tried. But then also it allows us to see how our training program affects our games program and what players are taking on which specific techniques. And then also it allows us to be more specific for them. As I said previously, certain players will have their favorite 2 skills. And you see that even at the top level with the likes of Ronaldo, the likes of Messi. So as players start to form their identity and they have a strong identity at 16, you're then looking to refine what it is that they love to do or what they're excellent at doing.
Interesting. As well as working at Arsenal, you also you're an individual skill specialist, like myself, known as one of the 2 best in London. So that wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Just about that, then how you grew into that, and then how does that help what you do in academy football, and what's the challenges of doing that as well in terms of developing your brand and business stuff? Yeah.
So it started about 2.5 years ago. Not a great time to start doing it on a more regular basis, since we had lockdown, or so it appeared. And my biggest issue and my biggest reason for getting into it was simply that I was in an environment where I was seeing so many good players outside of academy football and inside of academy football, various academies, who were engaging in no technical development. Whether that be passing techniques, receiving techniques, skill combinations, ball mastery techniques, nothing. No 1v1s even. And so it was becoming apparent to me that players were not refining their potential full technical toolbox or not engaging it at all. So at first it was very much around kind of delivering a program which I had devised but also created based on my now 11 seasons straight in academy football and working across all ages, working across so many different clubs, good clubs. So that was very much about kind of, it's its design in terms of in the initial phases. What it's then grown on to be is a mixture of group sessions, but also I don't deliver one-to-ones. I deliver 1-to-2 sessions. I match players up because I'm not a massive believer in what's that? One-to-ones are effective. However, I like the additional element of having 1v1s within a practice. So players being able to actually train against each other for a portion of the session. So I often match clients together who are of a similar technical level and age and stage. And so that they are able to do plenty of unopposed work in terms of skill combinations, in terms of ball striking, in terms of, in terms of passing, receiving, but then also they get the added benefit of the 1v1, being able to dominate each other in situations both offensively and defensively in different areas of the pitch and so on.
And we've always been talking about this a lot. What's your thoughts? You see all these, because that's it's a saturated market now. Even managers, dogs doing one-on-one training. We've seen those guys have got their, the ladders out, and they've got the parachutes and the altitude masks. All these guys.
Altitude masks. Yeah, I'll be honest with you, Saul. The greatest thing about, the reality is that social media drives everything, right? Social media drives mine and your business, but what drives our clientele and what drives our standards is our experiences. I don't understand how people that have never worked in an academy environment, never developed players, never seen a journey, feel that they can add value to an academy player from a technical perspective. Or from any other perspective, to be honest. You have to have an understanding of the environment that your clients are in. So if you have no detailed environment or understanding of what the environment that your clients are in, you are often working when you see some of these people with the altitude mask, like you say, they're often working with players of a higher standard of what they are coached. They can add no value. And that's probably the biggest challenge, I think, for people like myself and yourself. First of all, the ladders and all that type of stuff on a 1-to-1, 1-to-2 basis, it's ridiculous. Especially the people working in the foundation phase. It's not a practice which is generally used in academy football. I've been in the game 11 years. I've never seen ladders used. But I see lots of players doing kind of strength and conditioning, but they can't coif. They can't roll off both feet. They can't combine 4 skills together. They can't pass off both sides. They can't receive under pressure. And so you've now got this kind of common misconception that in order to be in academy football, you've got to have the parachute on your back. There's no foundation players that are running at hardly any clubs, or if I think there is any club. I've never seen it. I don't know about you, but running with parachutes on your back at under 10, 11, 12, all that. It doesn't happen. So the deregulation of social media kind of really makes it a challenge for, I think, lots of people to kind of get their messages across. And like I say, it's about developing players with the football. And people say, "Oh, we'll do fitness training." Well, you can design a session, a technical session, to physically challenge the players. If you're looking to build kind of like that kind of aerobic capacity or anaerobic capacity, especially when they're 13, 14 and onwards. And this is probably the biggest challenge which I face, and I'm sure you kind of face it yourself, because you go online, it's impossible to avoid these days, isn't it?
Yeah, that's my argument, saying, listen, why are you using the ladders? Is that are you doing it to increase foot speed with the ball? Then why are you not using the ball? If you're doing it for football, then do it with the football. That's the whole point. It's just the transference, isn't it? There's no point. It's a waste of time. I said, unless you're a window cleaner, you shouldn't be having a ladder anywhere near your session or anything. But anyway, it's another pet peeve of mine. But I think we're lucky though to spoil, right? Because we worked at some amazing clubs and amazing environments, and people don't know. If you're a parent, you say, "Oh yeah, look, a ladder and a parachute." They don't realise that. People don't use that in elite environments. You don't use that in academy football. You don't need to. But like I said, so much of Instagram or Facebook is superficial, isn't it? Superficial nonsense. And I suppose, unfortunately, we have to partake in it. But I mean, that's, that people just look at it and say, oh, that looks fantastic, doesn't it? Like me, like those kids got hoops there, jumping in and out, hoop, diggity, like in out, shake it all about sort of thing. But, that's the world we're living in, right? What yourself then? What's the future hold for you? What are your ambitions in the game?
So for me, I mean, I love working in academy football. It's a real deep-rooted passion of mine. And like you say, in terms of my personal stuff, my kind of trajectory now is as quick as it's been, is very much now about kind of empowering others. I still feel there's far more players which can benefit from training with me. And when I say far more, I'm talking thousands more, because I have so many different platforms, including online, including group sessions, including 1 to 2 sessions. So increasing my capacity to do that. That's the immediate. The medium term is to actually start to develop coach education, and be able to create devising programs to actually develop coaches, and then go from there. To be honest, start to do plenty more work out in America. And spread the word there, because at the moment they are in a similar situation with us, where everything is very much around team and so on and so forth, in terms of big numbers, one ball, and I'm kind of stripping it back. So kind of that point of difference that I'm looking to add out there is similar to what I've already started to add here.
Tell us a bit about your online stuff. So you're quite active in that space. I mean, you go in after this directly to do a session. So you go to an AstroTurf, you do an online session with kids from all over the world. Know that. Tell us a bit about that, because that's you're quite unique in that. I think you're doing really dominating that online market.
So my stuff is very much on a live interactive basis. So it actually was born out of lockdown. I had a parent ask me, she said she was taking her son to Florida, which is where they spend half the year. And she said, listen, I do yoga online. Can my son do, can you coach my son online? I said, well, I've never really thought about it, but I'll have a go. I'll see how we go. And then from there, it just took off. And the demand was so significant post-lockdown. When I got to a stage where I was doing 60 sessions a week, at the height of lockdown, and then post-lockdown, I had clients playing at top Cat 1 clubs saying to me, look, Alex, can we continue online and rather than coming to see you face to face, because I've seen how much my son or daughter has improved. Now, everything that I do is kind of, like I say, live, delivered via FaceTime or Zoom. I have clients clients signed at LA Galaxy. One client signed at Sporting Kansas. I have 2 clients based in Charlotte in the US. And I also have an online group session whereby players can all train together. And it's as simple as I set the session up in front of them. There's never anything used more than 5 cones and 1 football. There's nothing more than, players don't really need a space larger than 4 meters by 4 meters. If they do have anything more, fantastic. If they don't, it can all be contained. And everything's just about the details around the ball. And my delivery is very much around principles, being able to deliver a consistent language for players to understand, to then be able to digest, and also then be able to go and apply that specific language when they're reflecting on their own development. And it involves various combinations. It involves players being able to master the ball in different ways, whether that be aerially, receiving the ball from a height, whether that be kick-ups, and then obviously plenty of skill combinations which allow players to twist and turn and ensure that they maintain balance, but also are able to explode and move with the ball efficiently and pivot effectively.
How long are the sessions? Are they hour sessions, these ones, are they?
Yeah, so the my one-to-one sessions are an hour long, and as are my group sessions. The group sessions take place every Sunday at the moment, at 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. Nice time. Lots of players kind of have a little bit of downtime, and they will be increasing. There'll be plenty more as well. Interesting.
And so, what would your advice be to a young coach who wants to have incredible, a career in the game like you've had so far?
Big thing for me is observe. Don't be too quick to chase the titles. Do plenty of observation. I've learned so much more from my time observing the best possible coaches as opposed to doing courses. The best value that courses will add will very often be the quality of the candidates that you end up meeting. And then just ensure that you get lots of goes at practicing and get it wrong. Take risks with your coaching, but ensure that you actually plan, do, and review.
And I know you spend a lot of time up in the northeast as well, because I know your partners from up there. So, I mean, the real question is, are you a Mackin or a Geordies as your second team? Are you going to get in trouble for this?
I'll get in trouble with some of my clients up there. Yeah, I have to say black and white because my stepson is black and white, and he would absolutely kill me if I said red and white. But a lot of my clients are red and white, and it's a big rivalry. But the whole region's fantastic. I absolutely love it up there. It's the most friendly people that you'll ever wish to meet. But I am black and white. Yeah, they're my second team for sure.
So if people didn't know, that's Newcastle, Sunderland for the uneducated people there, for the up and northeast. So, and just finally, how can people get hold of you, Alex? I mean, tell us a little bit about your socials. People want to come and see your great work on social media and stuff. So
the contact on social media, my Instagram is probably my most popular one. Is at coach_Alex N. If they'd like to get in contact with me via email, it's alex@coachalexn.co.uk. My Facebook is Coach Alex N, no underscore, and also via Twitter, which is not a platform where you'll see most of my best work, but it's also the same handle as what it is on Instagram, at Coach_Alex N.
Lovely. Alex, thanks very much, mate. It's been fantastic. Appreciate your time.
My pleasure, Saul. Thank you. Take care.
Thanks for tuning in to the MyPersonalFootballCoach.com Soccer Player Development Podcast. MyPersonalFootballCoach.com's dynamic ball mastery program is the world's leading online individual technical training program, proven and developed at the highest level in the English Premier League. Sign up now to train like the pros and take your game to the next level. Master the ball, master the game.